So in this video we're going to talk about the type tool, and I'm going to do it with a new document. So in Photoshop I'm going to go up to File, New, and I'm just going to create from the web presets a 1024 by 768 pixel image. You can create whatever size you'd like. Now when I go ahead and create the type tool, one of the things that you're going to want to know with the type in type tool is that Photoshop deals with type a little bit differently. A lot of programs have to deal with type a little bit differently, and Photoshop is no exception. And there's some intricacies which you're going to want to become comfortable with as you start to use it. So as I click on my type tool, what I might like to do is hold the type tool down and click on the horizontal type tool. Now for me, when I use Photoshop, I very rarely use vertical type, or I've already showed you an example of a texture where I've created some type or a selection of some type. But for the most part, I mean, this is when I'm using the type tool 99.9% of the time I'm using this horizontal type tool up here at the top. So that's where we're going to spend most of our time. So as I use my type tool, there are a couple ways that you can introduce type into Photoshop. One of the ways is type on point, and the other one is paragraph type. And so the first one I'm going to show you is type on a point. So if I just click with my type tool, notice what happens is automatically Photoshop creates a new layer for my type tool. Type is put in its own specific kind of layer. It's not like a regular layer or a blank layer or a rasterized layer made of pixels. It's converted to pixels in the end, but for the most part this is kind of a combination of a vector layer and a raster layer. Remember, vector being points and lines and curves and mathematical formulas. Well, type is made of points and lines and curves and mathematical formulas, and so the way that it's visualizing or putting it into this into Photoshop is by pixels or raster, but really the information that it's starting with is vector. So if I just click and I start to type and hit spaces and things like that on point, it just goes on and on and on and highlights, and will just continue on and on and on down the line. Okay, so that's type on point. I'm going to go ahead and grab this layer and drag it down to the trash and delete it. Now another way that you could put type in is paragraph style, and this is the way most of the time you're probably going to want to choose. If I click and I drag with my type tool without just clicking, I'm able to create this bounding box or paragraph box, and a paragraph box shows up with a little blinking cursor, and as I type, when I get to the end, I don't have to hit return or enter. It just automatically carries over to the next area in the box. So as I move through, it automatically moves for me. Okay, so I can hit type in my type that way. One of the nice things about it, when I'm in the type tool and I have paragraph type, I can scale my box larger or smaller, and the type will wrap accordingly. Notice when you do move your box smaller than what type can actually fit in the box, it doesn't give you too much of an indicator, but at the very bottom there's a little cross in the bottom right hand corner of the paragraph box that tells you, hey, there's some more type in here that's available that you can't really see right now because the box isn't large enough. And as soon as I make the box large enough, that little X in that bottom right corner box moves away. So that's two ways that you can introduce type, both of which, when you introduce type, creates this type layer over here at the top. So one of the things that you're also going to want to be aware of is if you want to do some other things, like let's say blur your type, or if I go up to filter, select, or if I go up to filter, notice none of my blur options are available right now. A lot of my options aren't available in that, for that matter. And that's because when you're in the type tool, you have to be a little bit careful, because things like your quick key combinations, obviously hitting B to get to the brush tool isn't going to work for you, because when you hit B, it's going to give you a B inside of your paragraph. So other things are not going to work really for you unless you get out of the type tool. And you can get out of the type tool by clicking on a different tool. I usually choose the move tool, so I just go up and click at the move tool, and notice it moves me out of type entry mode, and now I can go up to filter or use some of my other options. If I want to get back into the type layer, I can get my type tool and I can click inside this box, and automatically selects my type layer, automatically gives me the ability to adjust my paragraph bar. Okay, so jumping in and out of type mode by selecting these different tools is important while you're using the type tool. So now that I have some things open, let's say I wanted to choose filter blur, and I wanted to blur this type. One of the things that you also want to be careful about is changing your type layer from a regular type layer to a rasterized layer. So you saw before where I was able to go in with my type tool and maybe select some area of type or make a spelling change or add to my type. That's because it's a type layer. With my type tool, it still works. If I change it to a raster or a regular type layer by going up to using some sort of a filter or a warp, or I want to do some other sort of operation on it, some sort of image adjustment. Let's say I go to blur and I want to blur my type. It's going to tell me that it's going to have to rasterize my type before I go forward. I could choose to do so, and I could blur this type and it looks fine. And I could choose OK, but you'll notice I don't have a little T over here in my layers panel, and it is no longer a type layer that I can use my type tool on to go back and make a change in spelling or make an adjustment in the font or style of my type, because when I click, all it's going to do is create a new type layer for me, and I'm going to be able to add new type. So I'm going to hit undo or step back a few different times here, step back until I go back to get my regular type layer. So if you do decide that you're going to want to rasterize a type layer for some effect, like a blur that you're going to give it or an image adjustment, I always recommend making a duplicate of your type layer and just hiding your type layer. And maybe that way, I've run into this several times. If you give it to a different designer, or maybe you design some sort of a business card or a poster or something like that, and later down the line you decided you wanted to rasterize a layer for some sort of effect on that poster or business card. When you open it down the line or later on a different machine or pass it to a different designer, at least they're able to see or unhide that original text layer and make an adjustment to it and see what type of font style you used, see what type of font you used and things like that, and then they can make a change and rasterize it on their own later. So I always, if I'm going to rasterize a type layer, I usually do it on a duplicate of the type layer itself. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. Another way that you can get type into your document, I'm going to go ahead and delete this type layer again and go back to my original, is if I click and drag a paragraph or click a point style type entry, I can type my type in just by using the keyboard, or let's say I go to Word, or I can go to Safari or something like that and select an area of text. So here we are on the St. Louis Community College web page, and I'm just going to hit Command C or Control C on Windows to copy this text, and I'm going to go back to Windows, and you'll notice on part of that text inside of Safari, some of it was bold, some of it was blue and had hyperlinks. Unfortunately, inside of Photoshop, when I choose Edit Paste or Command V in Mac or Control V in Windows, and I paste that type, it only introduces that type in the format that is in the type tool's present options bar. So Myriad Pro Bold 72 point left justified is exactly the type that I'm getting when I paste that all in. So if I want to hit undo and I want to go back and adjust this and say, all right, I want to put that type in at let's say 14 point, and then I hit paste, notice it all gets in there at 14 point. It also doesn't wrap it any differently than what it was in the original when I copied and pasted in there. So that's something that you're going to want to pay attention to. Another thing is, once you've got type in, you can highlight it and make changes to it with its options bar up there at the top. So if I wanted to go in and say, all right, I wanted this a little bit larger, this top paragraph, I can make it selection, go up into my top bar up here and choose 30 points. So now I've got a 30-point headline. Let's say I wanted to make this paragraph in a red text. I can click on this option, create red text. I can change my font style or my specific font by clicking in my top menus here and making changes in my options. If I double click, I can select a word. If I triple click, I can select a line. If I quadruple click, I can select a paragraph. And if I quintuple click, I can select everything within this entire paragraph and make a change. Notice in my top menu bar that I don't have an option for font, and that's because there are several different fonts being visualized here, and I can combine them all back into Myriad Pro if I wanted to choose that. I can combine them all back into 14 point if I choose this option, make them all black again by choosing this option. So there are different ways to adjust your type for the most part, but I think the main things to be very aware of is that anytime you use the type tool, it's going to create a new type layer. If you want to go back in and get that type layer, you can select its layer, select the type tool, and click inside on some of that text, and you can highlight it and you can make adjustments to your paragraph. You can also rasterize your type layer by going to Layer, Rasterize Type. Or sometimes you'll be forced to rasterize if you use an operation like, let's say, a blur. It'll tell you have to rasterize your type layer.